to be talking now about the next article of the Constitution, which is Article 3. So we went through Article 1, we went through Article 2, now we're going into Article 3. And the interesting part about Article 3 is it's the judicial branch, but we weren't exactly sure what the judicial branch's job would be. We knew that we needed a judicial branch. We needed a set of judges to rule over any cases within the United States, outside of the United States, right? We needed something to manage that, as we didn't have that under the Articles. So we created the judicial branch with the idea that we would kind of figure it out as we go along. We decided that the judicial branch would have a set of judges led by a chief justice. But interestingly enough, we don't have actually written in the Constitution how many judges it has to be. So right now we have 9, and we always try to keep it at an odd number because of ties. So in this case, right now we have 9, but previously we've had 7, we've had 12, because there's nothing really actually written in the Constitution that says 9. Now, these people are appointed by the president, but approved by the Senate, which is why oftentimes, like we just recently saw a bunch of judges being approved under Trump's administration. We saw Ruth Bader Ginsburg die right at the tail end of Trump's administration, and then we brought in some other ones. Biden brought in a judge as well. So they are brought to the Senate. So the president will appoint somebody who they feel would be a really good job, do a really good job. And these people usually have a background in being a lawyer. Oftentimes they had already been federal judges, which is what's interesting about Article 3 is we create this hierarchy of this judgeship, right? You have the Supreme Court, which is the law of the land, and then all these other smaller courts that go underneath it that are federal courts, and then you have appellate courts, and you have state courts, and all of these types. So the Article 3 really designates how that hierarchy goes. So the president chooses somebody who is formally a judge in this position, who has proven to be unbiased, right? Somebody who perhaps feels that the Constitution is the law of the land. And then they have to go through an entire process to be approved by the Senate. They have a whole trial. The Senate holds an entire trial. And they will either approve or not approve the person based on the trial. And so once they're there for life. And that's why they have lifers, which is one of the situations where a lot of people question this. Is this something that is the right way to go? Keeping these people in this position for life. So that's always been very, very controversial. But the founding fathers felt like of all the 3 branches, this is the job that you've really sort of like proven yourself for and like built yourself up to this point. So it seems as if you should be able to be a part of this jury of the Supreme Court for the rest of your life. Now, what's interesting, and like I had said, we weren't exactly sure what the judicial branch's job would be in terms of checks and balances. And it won't be until 1789. So this is 2 years after the Constitution is already in effect that the Judiciary Act was passed, which basically states that the judicial branch is able to label something unconstitutional, saying it's beyond the boundaries of the Constitution. And this won't be utilized until our second president, going into our third president, John Adams, into Thomas Jefferson's administration, where there will be a very famous case called Marbury versus Madison, where our Supreme Court Chief Justice will put this into effect, labeling something unconstitutional, and we'll find that like, oh wow, okay, yeah, that's the power of the Supreme Court, right? If a president acts beyond their powers, or if a legislative branch they pass a law that is beyond the abilities or the powers of the Constitution, they could label it unconstitutional. And if it is unconstitutional, right, this is giving the Constitution the ability to be the law of the land that everybody has to abide by. So they will interpret the law and see if, based on what the Constitution states, whether it's okay or not. this is something we're going to explore throughout the rest of this year. Now, the other articles, there's more articles in the Constitution. We just really examined the first three, the legislative branch, executive branch, and the judicial branch. And then the next four you have designated to the states, the amendments, the supremacy clause, which says that the Constitution is the law of the land, and the ratification process. So those are the articles of the Constitution. Now, it's going to take about 3 years for the states to ratify. In fact, we only needed 9 states to pass it to put the Constitution into effect. So not all the states had actually received the Constitution or passed the Constitution when the Constitution was actually put into effect. In fact, New York State didn't even receive the Constitution to review it until after the Constitution was already put into effect. So there is a little controversy with that, right? We talked about like Pennsylvania and how Pennsylvania was so aggressive and kept people out or brought people in and locked them inside and all this kind of stuff. So George Washington is elected in 1789, so he becomes president before we even have the Constitution fully seen by all of the states, which again is going to cause a lot of controversy. And so we'll see a lot of states really like criticize that. They'll criticize Washington. They'll criticize the federal government for being too strong and really being enacted until the states fully saw it. It was a whole big controversy. And also, we don't even receive the Bill of Rights until a year later. So we create the Bill of Rights about a year into Washington's presidency. Now, because of all this controversy, Washington is actually not elected by a typical election. He's only elected by Congress. He's elected unanimously, which means that, everybody voted for him in Congress. And so poor George Washington, right? We said all he wants to do is go home and retire and like hang out at his house in Mount Vernon in Virginia. And we just keep calling him back into action. But we don't feel too badly about it because, he gets to be the first president of the United States. We're going to examine his presidency when we return from break because this really is a crucial moment for American history when Washington steps in. So I want to just sort of like fast forward a little bit and talk about that Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights, as I had mentioned, wasn't ratified until 1790. So it wasn't even like created and then ratified. A lot of the people of the nation felt that the Constitution, while very complicated and impressive, it didn't state anything about the people's rights. And so there was a really big argument as to whether so what do we do? Do we write down what our rights are? And then does that limit our rights? So these are the only rights we have? Or do we make sure that our rights are guaranteed by the government? And what rights are they? Yada, yada, yada. So we just really had to sit down and figure out how this would work, which is one of the reasons why the last 2 amendments are kind of like a gray area. So I want to talk about the Bill of Rights, what's in the Bill of Rights, and then we'll discuss. So first and foremost, these Bill of Rights are made to guarantee our freedoms that are secured by the government. So meaning these rights cannot be taken away from you, and if they are, the government has to step in. So the first one is one of the most well-known ones, right? It's our freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and so that, of course, is guaranteed by the government. Then the next one is our right to bear arms, which is, of course, is always very controversial. If you actually read the wording of this, it actually states that we have the right to have a militia, bear arms, so that we have the right to have a militia, which makes sense to us because in the American Revolution, right, the militias are what won us and protected us from the British. So we get why that's put in there. Obviously, today that's very controversial since our weapons are very different today from back then, but that's a conversation for another day. The third one also makes sense to us because we can't quarter troops, which, again, we get it. Now, Amendments 4 through 8 really go through the process if you were to be arrested. This was really important for us because we know that monarchs and kings would throw you in jail for like no reason at all. So we wanted to make sure that we had our due process, our abilities known, that if you were to be in trouble by the law, how that should play out. So if you think of it like the way in which somebody is arrested is how 4 through 8 plays out. So Amendment 4, you have to have probable cause in order to arrest somebody. Then you have the right to a trial. This is your due process, right? You have to have this trial in order to, if you're arrested, you have to have a trial, right? This is your process that's due to you as an American citizen. Sometimes you'll also see in this one, this is like the double jeopardy one where you can't be tried twice for the same crime. You have the right to a speedy trial, your right to trial by jury, obviously, and then 8 is that there's no cruel and unusual punishment. So if you are convicted, then, there's got to be some rhyme and reason behind your punishments, okay? So this is where I say, like, we have gray areas in 9 and 10. So in 9, it's basically like whatever powers were not mentioned here in this Bill of Rights are given to the people. And then 10 is basically the same thing, but to the states. So whatever power is not given in whatever freedom is not mentioned here is given to the state government. So the states get to decide. So that's really where I guess that kind of the compromise came into play, because it's sort of like, well, what if there's something we didn't think about that we have to maybe deal with later on? How are we going to change that? And so that's where these are sort of the gray, fluffy areas saying like, well, there's more, but it's not necessarily stated right here. So that's the Bill of Rights. And again, I think it's important to recognize that that was added later. All right, everybody, that's it for today. So let's just make sure we have our notes, and we'll be prepared to discuss it when we come back. Have a great day. Bye.